Welcome to today's webinar. It's called Yes, There is a Better Way to Do Vendor Risk Assessments. My name is Glenn Gower, and I'll be your moderator today, and I'm joined by my colleague, Kirk Hogan. Kirk is our Chief Operating Officer here at Iceberg and one of our Senior Risk Management Consultants. Welcome, Kirk.
Thanks very much, Glenn.
At Iceberg, we help organizations plan, deploy, and support risk management software solutions, including ServiceNow, and we work with organizations across North America offering a full life cycle of services, including GRC workshops, professional services, support, and more. And we help in a whole range of non-financial risk areas, including vendor risk, SecOps, operational risk, business continuity, enterprise risk management, and more. I'm going to hand it over to Kirk in a moment. I just want to mention that we will be sharing today's deck and the video from the presentation on our website, icebergnetworks.com, so I'll be emailing it out to everyone after today's presentation. And Kirk, over to you.
All right, thanks very much, Glenn. I think we'd agree that the majority of people on today's webinar are probably somebody in the vendor management group, whether they're vendor managers, whether they're vendor risk assessors, and you're all charged with dealing with a large portfolio of assigned vendors. And you're also being asked to demonstrate that you got complete and accurate communications and information around that vendor, because ultimately you want to be able to manage the risk associated with the vendors that you do business with. So there's four objectives for our outcomes today. We want to show you how to juggle that large number of vendors that you have to do communications with. We're going to talk about how to streamline those communications. We're going to show you the conversational approach that ServiceNow employs in order to actually make that work. And we want to identify some tangible benefits. We want to give you some ideas about how life could be different if you had the ServiceNow vendor risk management solution in place. We're going to demonstrate that through a process, through a bit of I guess, a scenario between XYZ company and Iceberg Networks. So before we do that, I want to talk about the challenges. The challenges that we see with vendor risk is around, and it's really in that top line, it's about the vendor risk processes are not converged and the existing tools can't keep up. So the idea of converge is really important. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But as far as the visual goes, on the left-hand side, you see the legal, HR, and IT departments. These are departments that you're going to be working with in order to solve some of these challenges. But right now, you're probably using email, and they're probably giving you attachments, and that's fairly typical. Within the center of the diagram is you trying to put all this together, and the bottom circles are really the other vendor organizations, whether they're people, and they're also sending you information via email attachments. And you just can't keep up. And it's not to harp on Excel. It's a good way to organize information, but we want to give you that holistic visibility. There's also an important point. I want to focus on the word converge just for one last second. There's two important things around convergence. One is around your internal processes. So they need to converge, both the systems and the processes, and they need to be in one stream. And that's a concept we're going to talk about as we talk about ServiceNow. So one stream of information. And the second idea of convergence is it isn't just your organization. It isn't just the vendor organization. It is you and the vendors that you do business with. So they must also converge. So that's an idea that we want to talk about during today. So what would that look like in the future? In the future, I like to think of anything that I'm looking at with a computer screen as a portal. It's a portal, whether it's on a mobile device or it's a desktop. It's still a portal to different systems. Most users don't care what system is attached to. In this case, we want to leverage the ServiceNow platform to provide this portal experience. On the left-hand side, again, are those organizations that we're going to be requesting maybe some review activities with, some tasks, delegate that way. We've got some, all of the vendor organizations that we're dealing with outside of our organization, as well as the integration with our GRC. But the important thing is that it is one system. The portal is literally just a slice off the same system that we're using internally to manage those vendor risk activities. So that portal is a really important part of this whole concept. So now we're going to take you through a bit of a scenario. I'm going to act as a big player in a company, XYZ company. And I'm part of the vendor management group. Whether I'm a vendor manager or vendor risk assessor, that'll be blurred. But we want to identify the risk associated with the vendors that we do business with. So we've done some things already. So not like our previous demos where we sort of spend a lot of time just on the interaction outside with the vendor portal. We set a lot of that information up previously for this webinar. So we've established vendors and contacts and created some of those assessment templates. So then the other things that we're going to do is I'm going to act next as the vendor risk assessor. So I want to be able to distribute the assessments to the vendor. In this case, it's going to be Iceberg. We'll be reviewing some responses to the assessment and following up with any issues. But I'll also be playing the vendor, in this case, my brother Jack, and I will be responding to the assessments that were submitted to me. I can manage my team, so demonstrate the time savings there, and then of course I'm going to interact and follow up with any issues assigned to me. And after we do that, we're going to come back into the user interface on ServiceNow, and we're going to focus on some of the time-saving activities that can be done right within the ServiceNow bigger platform. So at that point, I'm going to just, I can get control.
Yeah, I'll pass over control to you here, Kirk. Just give me a moment here. Making Kirk a presenter. And over to you.
Great.
There you go. We're all good.
So I'm going to show two screens during this demonstration. So this screen, if you're not familiar with it, is the ServiceNow interface. And right now we're looking at the vendor risk solution. There are some common components. When I look at it, this is sort of my home base, my dashboard tells me the things that I need to do within their vendor management group. So it's got an idea of the issues by priority. It's got the vendors by their risk rating. If I scroll down, this is also, now this is where we start to see some of the big wins. When we start to manage a couple of assessments. So right now in our demo data for today, I've got one assessment for October, 3 in November, and one back in December. In the real world, you're dealing with dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of assessments across that vendor risk organization. So this allows me to start to see the velocity of the workload that I have coming up with my vendors. And down here, if I had some vendor-related policy exceptions, I'd see those as well. So what we're going to do is I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about the information that we've got set up, and I'm going to focus on Iceberg Networks as the scope of our demo today. So here's something we want to do in a regular active business is I want to be able to send out one of these assessments to Iceberg Networks. So I do that by working from the company record, and I can see that I've already got these vendor contacts set up. By the way, because they've been set up as primary contacts, these are the people within that vendor organization that can also manage their users. Typically, if you need another user to be added to the vendor side of your portal, if you have one, you typically have to go back to the IT organization saying, add this user, they're associated to this vendor contact, make sure that they only can see their stuff, and then they're provisioned, and then you notify the vendor that that person exists. And if people forget passwords, etc., it adds a little bit more to their workload. In this case, ServiceNow has entirely put that within the vendor's hands themselves by assigning a primary contact. They take that responsibility. That's first big win for you. In the idea of assessments, though, there's an idea of the repeating assessments and assessments, and they work largely in the same way. A repeating assessment the system will auto-generate the assessment for you once you get a regular cadence going with your vendor. But in this case, we're going to assign a new assessment to Iceberg Networks. So I'm going to do a SIG Lite assessment for Iceberg Networks. I'm going to issue that to them, and as the vendor contact, I'm going to be getting that as soon as I submit that. I'm going to save this assessment record. Now what I get to do is there's a couple things. I'm going to go directly to the manual addition of questionnaires and requests for documents. I'll show you a little later on that there's a way to actually get faster at it once you understand what types of things you're going to be requesting of those vendors, and that'll be done through these assessment templates. So right now, I want to add a questionnaire, and I will put, I've already got a library of types of questionnaires. So here's the one for SIG Lite. Neat thing about SIG and SIG questionnaires is ServiceNow has partnered with them to just embed their question set and their content and their template within their capability, within their platform. So now what I look at is I look at this questionnaire and I see that it will be, it's a SIG-Lite, and I want to be able to submit that to the vendor. So I'm going to assign this to me as the vendor manager. And then I want to move that off to the vendor. So I'm going to submit that to vendor. Now what's happening is it's taking a copy of that assessment, a blank copy, and it's submitting it over to Iceberg Networks. And it's telling you that so in the top of the banner here. And if I just update this, save and update this record, it'll see that the state of this has actually been submitted to vendor. I'm going to flip screens now so you know where we're going. I'm now on the vendor portal side. This is the same system as we're using internally. It is literally just a web interface on the same one, but it's got a lot of heavy-duty security measures in place to make sure that, in this case, Jack Hogan, my brother at Iceberg Networks, he is only got access to Iceberg Networks information. So right now, it's showing that I don't have any assessments. But when I refresh that screen, it's going to now show that I have this SIG-Lite assessment. That's the one I just got sent. If I click into that now, and I'm operating now as the vendor, I see that the requests include this SIG-Lite. If I had used a template, I could actually have a collection of requests. So each one of these assessments is what we call a request. So I can click into the questionnaire. Now there's a couple options. Because I've used the SIG version of this assessment, I can answer all the questions here manually. I can literally crawl down the screen and answer each one of them. And as I see, each time I go into a new section and I start answering questions, when I complete all of the required minimums, I'm going to get a green check mark. When I'm simply doing my work and I'm on my way to completing those, I'm going to get this little in progress indicator. That way, it's a quick way for me to see out of all this work I have to do and all those questions I have to answer where I am in the process. Now there's an easier way, because most of the vendors you're dealing with have probably filled out a SIG questionnaire in the past, and if not, if you're dealing with them a lot, they would be behooved to actually fill one out and have it available to you, because when they have that, it is going to be available for them to upload. Now, instead of me having to go through and answer those hundreds of questions within this web interface, I've now loaded all of my answers. So when I see this, I can exit that, and it's probably going to tell me that I need to answer more because I've got 166 of 172 of them answered. If I come back over to the other interface, I can't actually see the questions related to that because I've got 0% and no responses. That way, a vendor can answer their questions knowing that until they submit it, they're not done. So let's submit this assessment, and it's going to tell me that I'm not done because I've only got 166 of 172, and that's okay. I can still submit it because when it comes back to the interface here, it's just going to refresh. It's now going to say I've got 97% of my responses completed, and I can view those responses. As a vendor manager now working within ServiceNow, I can review the assessment questions that were submitted by Jack, and I can see exactly what Jack is seeing on the outside. So I know that he needed to be able to do those. Now I can go off and mark each one of those if I wanted to. I'm just going to try and close that. All right, so instead of that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise an issue. I'm going to raise an issue with Jack, and I'm just going to assign this issue to him. So I am going to say, need full answers on SIG. Okay, so that is what I'm going to save. I'm going to make this visible in the vendor portal, and I'm going to save that. Now, I just want to make sure that, okay, so issue, make sure that that is visible in the vendor. All right, so I'm going to come back over now to the portal, and I'm going to come back up to issues. And here it is. Here's the issue. I need full answers on this thing. So I can review this, and I can see this, and I can say, I'm not really sure what you mean. Now this is the demonstration of the sort of the conversational piece. Now before I send that off, I'm going to do a sort of a trick with my screens here. I'm going to do a split screen just so you can see the interaction within this. So right now I've got this activity log, and I've got no responses there yet. And I've got this. So I'm going to send this across. I'm going to send this back. Right now, I started to see this conversation. This is how people work in today's world. They have mobile devices. They're chatting. They're blogging all the time. So now I can explain back to Jack saying there are 2 sections requiring info. And I want to make sure that it is visible to Jack. Now this should come across here to the other portal. No, so 2 more sections. And just make sure I assess. Yeah, so I've had a bit of a challenge with internet. I may be running into this again, but what's going to happen is this interchange is going to go back and forth between Jack and the vendor manager as they go through that, and they're going to attach evidence, etc. But now what I want to do is I want to talk. Yep.
I was going to say, Kirk, it's a real time or near real time, depending on the interwebs conversation between the 2 parties here.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. I want to talk a little bit about something here now. I talked about managing the team. So here's Jack as the primary contact, and they can invite other contacts. What's going to happen is they're going to get presented with a screen here. So I'm going to put in another Hogan. I'm going to put in John Hogan this time. My own name, I can't spell it. Here we go. And then I'm going to put in and then their address. This address is important. So this address is where this update is going to go as far as the details for them to sign in and change the default password. It is also their user ID. So this way, if by using email addresses, we know that they're globally unique. If we know that when these people log into the vendor portal, that they will be assigned to just that company, and that's how they can maintain the security. This is a very unique thing across the ServiceNow vendor portal, and it's a high security measure. If I wanted to have them manage the team as well, I can indicate they're a primary contact. In this case, I'm not. I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to save that. Meanwhile, the system is now sending that off, the auto registration, and it's added to the user base. This person, as soon as they accept that invitation, they're going to be able to log in and start working on this right away. What's the power of the vendor manager, the vendor contact, being able to manage the team and offload that from the internal vendor manager? That's very powerful. Now I want to come back to the internal interface because there's some other things that will allow you to work quickly and efficiently within the vendor manager task. I talked about the assessment templates. Before we do that, there's sort of a collection of other things that are reusable as components. So document requests, SOC 1 to report requests are very normal when you're dealing with vendors. Financial requests, there's a long list. So really the opportunity as a vendor manager now is to create this library of reusable document requests. And the reason we want to do that is now instead of typing out a typical email like you're going to do, and you usually rewrite it, unless you've got some sort of template system, but you're usually rewriting an email to your other vendor contact saying, I need this report. Now that's where the problem starts, because you have to remember that you sent that email to that vendor contact, and then you need to make sure that all of the information they sent back in response to just that one email is actually the information you want, and that you've got the latest version. But by encapsulating all of the things around a SOC 2 report request, anything that is associated back to the vendor for that is now in that stream just for the SOC 2 report. Same thing as the SOC 1. Now those are just requests for document templates. For the questionnaire, this is where we pick up the SIG Lite and the SIG Full. So depending on the risk tier of that vendor, you'll provide the entire SIG for them to answer, or a subset of those questions within the SIG Lite. These are some other common questionnaires that you might develop, and they're going to render in the web portal the same way that we saw the SIG one as well. There's going to be questions and opportunity to provide additional comments and feedback. And you, as a vendor manager, can actually use this designer to design new assessments and be able to put those into the library. And when that becomes very powerful is in this assessment templates. And the assessment templates aren't more document requests, and they're not more questionnaires. What they are collections of those two things. So when I look at the security assessment moderate risk assessment template, what it really is a collection of the SIG-Lite questionnaire and the sample questionnaire, and also the SOC 1 report request. So when I now, I have one less click when I'm doing that vendor risk assessment. When I go back to that vendor record and I want to add an assessment, I'm not going to do it at the assessment at questionnaire level. I'm going to actually add an entire template full of these. Now keep in mind, when I add them to a template, they need to complete all of the components of that assessment for you to be able to say that that assessment has been complete. I want to come back up now to the dashboard, which is sort of your home base as a vendor manager or a risk assessor. And I want to look at sort of how practically that might work. If I see that, the ones that you want to send off assessments for, so there's the journey. So if you adopt a platform like ServiceNow, you're going to likely be working out of Excel or another system, and you're going to be moving to ServiceNow. So there's an evolutionary path. So you're going to have some that have been fully assessed, and there's going to be some where that have not been risk rated yet. So you're going to take those and you're going to send off assessments to that. That's a quick way for you to identify the ones that need those assessments. The other area is within these issues. This is a hard list to look at. So what ServiceNow has done is it's created this thing called a visual task board. And I think it's quite brilliant in the fact that it really just organizes information the way that people work. If I had to put things into a bucket, these are things that are unassigned. Now I've got people up here that are qualified to work on those issues. Right now I've got Bob Farini working on this issue number 1. I'm going to actually employ the system administrator in a primary role to take care of this number 2. And what that's going to let me do is assign this. Now I can literally move these from lane to lane if that workflow makes sense to me. But also I can go back onto the vendor assessment record and I can work from there. But this allows me to balance my workload. Because remember, as I move back into this, if I move back into here and I start to see this, if I have hundreds of assessments going on, I've likely got a lot more issues than just this polite little, 2 and 3 and 4 count. So that's another thing that allows me to do that. And then the same thing for tasks. Tasks are another way to just send off all these activities that maybe are requests for pieces of specific information, but they're things that you want to track and you want to know who's doing them, at what state they're at, and this is a nice visual way to look at it rather than looking at a list of information. So then I just want to come back one last time into this vendor record, make sure that we've got a view into Iceberg Networks and also their vendor tier. So this allows me to sort of see the ranking, et cetera, they're coming out of the assessments, all of the issues associated to it, whether they're off of 1 assessment or 10 assessments, and any tasks that we've assigned to them. So this gives me sort of a one-stop shop to see these different things associated with Iceberg Networks, and I can also see that this is this other contact that has yet to be accepted as a user. So Glenn, I think that's where I want to stop from a sort of identifying those wins as far as a vendor manager or risk assessor, but by using templated approach, by using a communication method, and by allowing the vendor to manage their own user base, I've saved myself a lot of time and I can really handle a larger portfolio.
Okay, thanks, Kirk. I'm going to just pull back presenter view here to my computer, so bear with me. It was a great overview from Kirk into the vendor risk, different views, different roles, conversational approach. And, if what you saw today resonated with you, whether you're an existing ServiceNow customer or you're new to the platform, we would be happy to set up a more customized demo for your organization. What you've seen here really is just the tip of the iceberg of how ServiceNow can help you run a more effective and efficient vendor program. And I think maybe start to give you view into transforming your overall risk management program. So if you'd like to see more, or if you have any questions, please get in touch with us. You can go to info@icebergnetworks.com. And as I mentioned, we will be posting the deck and the video to our website later today, icebergnetworks.com. So thanks to everyone who joined us, and thanks to you, Kirk, for the presentation,
Thanks very much, Glenn.
and I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.